Yeah, go ahead.
There you go. Right. I think you have to accept it. Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. So, in no particular order. So, I apologise if they're sort of all over the place, Pedro, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think I figured out about myself even before reading your book was that actually I felt more creative, shall we say, more ideas with limited amount of work available to me when I wasn't so overwhelmed as I experienced in lockdown, like I just mentioned to you before.
Yeah, the videos. Yeah.
And it was really interesting. So I think my mind was halfway open to the idea, even when and your book, by the way, was recommended by my brother-in-law, who bought it and read it. And had we been meeting face to face, would have almost certainly insisted on being present as well. And if the opportunity presents itself, then maybe that's something we can figure out going forward. So I think my mind was already open to this, and I really liked what we had to say. And the thing about the
creativity,
the pandemic, is that it affected absolutely everyone all at the same time. Rich, poor, black, white, whatever. We were all affected by this thing. So I was really interested in what you had to say around if it's going to be successful and it's going to be implemented. I'm paraphrasing, but basically all the governments of the world have to make it happen on day one. Have I remembered that approximately correctly?
No,
and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But
no, yeah, no. So about the implementation, it's so I think the essential problem is the issue of coordination. So that's crucial. So the thing is, the more coordinated it is, the easier. So it would be easier if it was implemented with US, UK, and Europe moving all together, rather than just one individual country, as it's harder within a country, just one firm moving, because it's a lot about the coordination. So what I think it should be, the movement shouldn't really be immediate. It's kind of it's a process, and that's why it's better to start sooner, because it can never be on the first 100 days in office that the government comes and says we are changing everything. It's much slower than that, because we have to give time for the firms to adapt, and the families and the government. So we should start the process as soon as possible. And it would be better if it was more coordinated, the better. But we should start it soon, and then just give time, saying for the next 2 years, the big multinationals have to make the change, and then up to year 5, you have smaller, medium-sized businesses, and in year 5, the schools are going to move to a 4-day week.
Right.
And then when schools move, the thing is, the issue of coordination is interesting, because I think most firms now might be thinking, what do I gain of moving to a 4-day week? But there is another question that you should have is, if all my clients, suppliers, and competitors are working 4 days, what's the point on being open on Friday? So that's the issue of coordination. So the questions are different. Obviously, it depends on the sector that we are talking about. But yeah, so it won't be immediate. It's going to take a long time, years, 5 to 6 years, and it won't be for everyone at the start. No. But ideally it's going to be universal. But that process of changing towards a 4-day week will first start, for the big companies, and then the market will work, and then people will be able to change, and wages will adjust, and things like that.
I understand, and I think the market does tend to find a way to make, because it has to, That bit I've learned out of real life rather than actually studying, but it just people find a way, and we've all found over the last couple of years how adaptable we are. In fact, the more I look at the conditions for social distancing, the more I quite like the sound of it, frankly.
It changes our perspective. There is a Harvard psychologist, Dan Gilbert. He has an amazing TED talk about synthesized happiness, and how the fact that things change, and even things that you wouldn't like from the start, it really changes conceptually your how attached you are to things, change really your preferences deep inside. So we are very adaptable. We just need this time, and the thing, we need an external force to push us, right? Because just doing by ourselves we'll never do.
No,
but
we need a nudge.
Yeah.
It might be that this is more than a nudge, but or certainly the pandemic was more than a nudge.
Yeah.
Indeed. But no, I very much take your point. Excuse me. So, do you believe that we will see this happen? I'm going to say in my lifetime, because I'm expecting that to be the next 25 years, please. Do you think there's a realistic prospect, or at least entering that process?
It's hard to distinguish now, make a judgment of what I think will happen from what I wish. Now, the fact that I wrote the book is really trying to spark a change. If you see a lot of companies doing it, and kind of that's the proof that even as a management practice, you have a lot of gains. You don't have all of the ones that will come from the coordination. So I think clearly the movement is there. Now we need, it really depends if there's a big company that decides to do it, like Ford did. So imagine that Amazon decided to do it, a big player in the economy. And then it's whether politicians will really get behind it. So I do think a lot is happening. The US is also going to discuss a 32-hour week in Congress. A congressman from California put in a bill, Mark Takano, and it already has the support of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which doesn't say, so in principle it's still, the betting market would say that it won't happen, but it's also a matter of persuasion. Yes. It's kind of a political choice. So I think the arguments that have been made, for example, in the UK with Corbyn, they can persuade some people, but they didn't reach the majority, I think, because of this scared of hurting the economy. So I think I do make other arguments that could reach kind of more liberal or more conservative audience. So I think if they come across, if they started being debated, we might hurry up. But I do hope that my daughter will live when she starts working. She's 6, so maybe in 15, 20 years.
She'll benefit.
So you might get it at the very end, when you are already close to retirement.
Yeah, that's right. When
not benefiting that much from it, but
it will be a pleasure to see it happen. And I am guessing that the Henry Ford, when he implemented this, would have come across pretty much the same arguments back then as for now, or different arguments?
No, all the arguments that I hear now were the same that were at the time. So a lot is this debate about the wages, if wages have to be cut. At the time was 16%, here now it's 20%. Others were just saying that it's a calamity or a catastrophe. So even the words are just the same. Yes. But what was surprising is that once it changed, no one wanted to go back to a coordinated 6 days, one day off in a coordinated fashion. So that's what kind of proved the concept. Proved that it was just a better way to organize the economy in the 20th century.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really, really encouraging. And the other question I've got, well, the first one you've answered already, but I've written this down. Why will it share the gains of economic growth among everyone rather than a minority? And actually, if you've seen the news over the weekend with the P&O announcement, people are kind of cynical. The average person, and I'll consider myself to be an average person, are kind of cynical about the motive of businesses these days. Some of them with good reason. So the spoils of reducing their costs are not going to be shared amongst the workers in the P&O situation. So how could we believe that the benefits, the gains of economic growth, how do we make sure that they are should we say, shared or distributed, I suppose in economics terms, distributed more evenly than just 1% taking all the benefits?
Yeah, so they would, in terms of at least the time, because it would be universal. But so you point out to a very serious, a very big problem that's been debated about amongst economists. And if you look at one statistic in the US, in the stock market, the listed firms, the ratio of profits to the wage bill, the profits that firms make in the 80s was 10%. So profits over was 10% of the total wage, the wage of workers, and the 10% were the profits. And right now, in the 2000s, 2010, 2020, it's about 30 to 40%.
Wow.
So it's increased a lot, and this is what the economists point to the declining in competition and the rising market power. So you have in all industries a handful of firms that dominate more and kind of strangle competition, and then they are able to charge higher prices and lower wages. And this was similar to what happened in the end of the 19th century with all these, what they became known as the robber barons, Leland and Stanford and Vanderbilt, and they became known because they created the university, not as how they made the money, but it was exploring monopolies and getting contracts from governments, and we are kind of in a similar situation. So that is one of the reasons why wages have been stagnated for half of the US workers. The real wages, so after accounting for inflation, they haven't really grown much since the 80s. So this is one of the issues. If you want another good book, it's called The Profit Paradox.
Thank you.
And that talks about this, how the fact that there's much more profits is just a symptom of lack of competition. And then you have superstar firms that's all in high tech, that the winner takes it all type of market. So this means that, in fact, when you look at the growth since the 80s, it has been shared unequally. And the argument is that by having a move to a 4-day week through legislation, it's a way to regain give more market, some way more power to workers. How would it happen? So why would it increase wages? It's just about we always come back to the markets, to the law of supply and demand. So on the one hand, you are taking hours. If it's a company with some reduction in hours, you are taking hours from the labor market, so reducing supply, and at the same time you are increasing demand for workers for the leisure industries, for instance, and the increasing demand because of the increase in productivity in the economy. So both because of the demand, higher demand, and because of kind of restricting supply, it's going to put pressure on wages. And two good examples were after the US implemented in 1938 reduced the working week to 5, the 3 decades after were the decades with highest wage growth in the US economy. It grew at 30% a decade.
Wow.
Real wages, and either before or after it didn't pass 10%.
Wow.
But the best case, or the most significant, is China. They shortened the working week in 95, so much later. And before, the wage, after accounting for inflation, they were growing at 0.1% a year. So basically they were not growing. That's why it was that idea of the cheap Chinese labor.
Yeah.
Afterwards, if you go now from 98 and 2010, for when I found statistics, it was growing at 14% a year. 14% a year,
Wow.
which is much faster than GDP. And it means doubling income every 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And so
is that the rule of 72 you're using?
Exactly. That's, you know, how much it takes to multiply depending on if it's 1%, 72, and if it's 14, then it's 6 years. It's so obviously we can't make any causal statements, and I think in the book I try to be very careful, because then if an economist, you know, you can't say that it was because, but it's just saying that it creates the conditions to kind of have a faster so you can think about there's been an imbalance in terms of power, and a lot of firms have accumulated, you know, market power. They've gained market power. They are strangling competition, and this is one way to try to rebalance.
Yeah.
So
because at the end of the day, sorry to cut across you there.
No.
If you extrapolate, if you sort of game out the current trend of the Apples, the Amazons that have just gargantuan sums in the bank that they can't possibly know what to do with. People have to have earn enough money to buy iPhones, to buy whatever product they're kind of peddling. But if you continually push wages down so people haven't got money to spend, that's only going to hurt them, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's one of the arguments. So that's a very Keynesian view, that you also need customers, and I think it's easier for you to understand that argument rather than even economists or even kind of companies. They think a lot about the costs of production, but they a lot is about clients. It's not so much the constraint, is not so much on the workers. You can improve efficiency and you gain a bit of margin, but essentially if you don't have customers, then I think there is the issue of needing money to buy goods, to buy Apple, the one you mentioned, but the other argument is that you also need time. And here this inequality plays a role, because I think when we talk about the rising inequality, there's always the two parts, the bottom part, like the workers in P&O, the cruise, so workers that are at the bottom of the distribution, making ends meet now. Gas prices are high, so they are really tight on cash. But inequality has the other side, the side of people with comfortable jobs that saved a lot, saved even more now during the pandemic because they couldn't spend on holidays. And I think for them, I think the problem is not so much the lack of savings or money. It's more the time. And I think when firms worry too much, or so the other thing, I was in Portugal, and something I went to in a taxi twice, and the same story. So two men close to 70, they were working 6 or 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day. And because they had to, and he said, well, it's not that we are really working. We go to one of these places where taxis wait for people, and then they wait for 2 hours for a client. And then I was telling you, imagine that if you worked if everyone decided to work half of the time, that means that when you would go to, to wait for a customer, instead of 2 hours waiting, you would wait 1 hour. Every customer that would want a cab drive would have a cab drive. You would have, as the industry of cab drivers in Lisbon, they would have sold the same number of rides, but each one would have worked the half of the time. So the productivity would double just like that.
Yeah.
And this is this difference between the individual behavior and as a group. Individually, each one has the incentive to work a bit more to get another customer a bit more, not to make 1 more ride, 2 more rides. But when everyone does that, they are not really creating more business. They are taking business out of each other.
Yeah.
So in the end, they just end up working a lot. They are not creating more value as a whole. And one of them said, "Oh, if I wasn't working, I would go with my wife for take her to a restaurant."
Yeah.
It's when they are not going to the restaurants, and I think that is happening kind of at the economic wide scale. You always have to work more.
Yes.
But you are not really creating any business, new customers, and you just make yourself less worse as a customer, I guess.
So the market is the same size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you just keep working more, but you are not really getting more customers.
Understood. Thank you. Right. So, okay, brilliant. I've got some related questions, but not directly to your book now.
So then, can I just tell you something?
Please
because
do.
of your NHS familiar connection, something that I didn't put in the book, but then because I once debated at the Treasury with Julian Jessup. He's more kind of liberal, right-wing economist. He's a good economist.
Yeah.
And he was defending, he was arguing against. And one of the arguments is that doctors can't treat as many patients in 4 days as in 5. And I think this argument is there a lot. No, that there are some services where you can't just cram in 5 days in 4 of the doctors.
Right.
And here, so I think to understand, we really have to have a wider picture of the business. And this is something that we usually don't. So in NHS, for instance, I went to see I went to see some statistics. So NHS England spends 48 billion in wages, but then it spends 6.5 billion in locum.
Yeah.
So it's when doctors don't show up because they are, and then you are paying
staff. Yeah.
Exactly, you're paying agency staff, which is paid 3, 4, 5 times, and that's the cost of absenteeism. So that's already 6% of what they spend on the whole business, on the whole wages, is this agency staff, and that's usually, and that the related thing is how much they spend in malpractice suits and legal fees, which is about the same amount, 6.5 billion. So when you put just the temporary workers of the locum shifts plus the malpractice, and these are medical negligence mistakes that happen when doctors are tired. My wife, she's as an obstetrician, most of this malpractice is in obstetrics, apparently. So when they are tired, they make more mistakes. So the gains, even that's the thing, the gains from, even if you have to hire more doctors, there will be gains in other areas of business. The other one is training. So the statistics in the last 10 years, before it was close to 80% of the trainees would go to higher, after being junior, they would go to higher training, to specialized training.
Yeah.
And in the last years, it's been 40%. So basically, this is why, because it's such a hard, it's such a hard job. there's the money, but it's not just the money, it's the whole package. No, when it's so hard, when you see all the news, how tough it is, how the long working hours are, they don't want to go. So this means that to train any new specialized doctor, suddenly it's twice as expensive, because half of them, if only 80% progressed and now only 40, means that each one that progressed costs twice as much to train as before. So that's the thing. So the 4, it's true that 4 is less than 5, but it's still more than 0. So if there are so many doctors leaving, if you have these costs of maintaining through the locum workers, if you have, accumulating errors and mistakes, which are not really a consequence of bad doctors, but it's just a consequence of tired doctors, then these are really, really costly. But so there's where the gains of the 4-day week would come from, all these different business areas. And I think this is a wider point, is why bigger firms have not really moved to a 4-day week. It's only smaller firms where the CEO has a really good idea of the whole business. And that the gain sometimes comes because you need a small HR department, you need less training to workers because they don't leave. And it's harder for larger firms where everything is compartmentalized. And you can't really see the big, all the gains would come in different, maybe a small legal department, a small HR department, or things like that. But tell this to your.
I'm just going to pause record just for 1 second on that. So there you go. So with the smaller firms, I think you're right there. First of all, if you're CEO of a smaller firm, let's assume it's not listed on the stock market somewhere, you've got more control over resources. And even if HR advise against, unfortunately, HR tend not to be that powerful, even in big firms. Otherwise, wouldn't have seen the P&O thing happen, because it just wouldn't allow that kind of thing to happen. But in a big firm, I think sometimes they can't do stuff on that scale because it's too hard.
But also because of shareholders, no? Because there's this there's the person that knows the business, but then it has to respond to shareholders that not necessarily know. And then if you say, oh, we are just doing a 4-day week, they don't understand where the gains would come from. You still have vision amongst a lot of businessmen that existed 80 years ago. It was exactly the same. That if you are reducing number of hours, you'll reduce production proportionately, and this is totally untrue. They think if you are reducing 20% the number of hours, we are going to get 20% less, and this is just doesn't not true. Not true at all.
No, that is a really good. That is a really, really good point. Because in your book you mentioned that actually people are going to have faith that these things will work out, find their own level, whatever word you want to put about it's very hard to produce a spreadsheet that says this is exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So if you're in the absence of evidence but intuition, then it's faith.
It comes. Okay. It is a bit of the first country to move, because we know the benefits for individual companies, but we don't know the benefits that will come from the coordination of all of them. So you see, the main problem for firms that do it is so they have to decide, do I give the Friday off to everyone, or do I give a different day off? When you give a different day off, you are worsening the coordination, the communication, decision-making within the firm, because not everyone's working at the same time. If you close on Friday, you are making worse, these relations with clients and suppliers. But these are the problems that disappear once everyone moves into the same schedule. But these gains are very hard to quantify. So the first movement, the first country to do it, it does require some a leap of faith.
Leap of faith. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
So what are the others? The other
Yeah,
questions?
well, I'm just conscious of time as well, your time.
Yeah.
I have a great interest in the productivity puzzle. And I think at some
I
level,
mentioned, yeah.
it is related in that, in particular, the UK's. Actually, can I put these two ideas into one
Okay,
question?
yeah.
We've got two superpowers, mainly, albeit Russia are flexing their muscles at the moment. But we've got China, big pardon, is one superpower. We've got the United States, on the other hand, as another superpower. I've got to believe the United Kingdom. We don't have the numbers clearly, and you'll realise my ignorance around some of this now. We don't have the numbers. We cannot play that game and win. Where do you think the United Kingdom? I'd like to think the answer could be in leadership and ideas. I've just biased your opinion now. But where do you think the UK could find itself relevant on the world stage still, given these two massive competing superpowers? Given we've left the EU. Let's not go there, because
yeah, but so this is the type of thing that's kind of a bit more out. It's completely out of my my jurisdiction. As I don't know if I could tell you anything more than I don't know, some boilerplate answers. Or so the thing is, I tend to see the economy. There's always this. It seems always in the public opinion that's kind of a war, no? That's China against the US, and I think what economics teaches is much more that how we can all gain. That the world is not a zero-sum game. That the economies we gain much more by cooperating. Yes. And we can all benefit from. So I don't see this kind of one versus the other, so I think the more interconnected the world is, the better. Suddenly it has some, it brings some problems, and I think it's part of the problems that we see in the economy are a consequence of a globalization. But I don't think the solution is to end globalization as it's currently. That's the road that it's going. No, with Trump doing all the trade wars with China and now with Russia, it's going to lead to even more kind of looking inwards rather than outwards. And I don't think that's the solution. So that's why I think the 4-day week is much more a better solution to improve the economy, to overcome the difficulties, the problems that globalization comes, because it implies a readjustment of who produces what. And it creates winners and it creates losers, and the compensation of losers that we said we should do following globalization, and we say we should protect the losers, but then when it came, we didn't know, and we've done austerity. We broke a lot of the commitments. Yeah, that safety net that was there to protect the. So it's quite normal that this reaction of people against globalization, and it just brings this narrative of the Chinese that are producing everything cheaply and are taking our jobs, or it creates that narrative, and I understand why it's created, but I don't think the solution is kind of scaling back on globalization. I think it's we have to find others, and I think that the 4-day week is that one.
It's a great way to get there.
Mm.
That's a really good shout. Allied, and thank you for stepping outside your comfort zone
Yeah.
on doing that. And I don't apologise for putting you in that position.
Yeah.
It's your fault for accepting the call.
Yeah.
So, okay, the next one I've got on the list, Pedro, is around the G7 and GDP specifically. Where typically the UK seems to be bottom or almost the bottom of that group. And that since the financial crisis of 2009, our productivity as UK PLC has, I can't remember what it is currently, but it was it's stubbornly remained at pre-crisis sort of levels, whereas other countries, US, etc., have a greatly more productive. So my question is, could the 4-day week make us more productive as a nation within that group? Or do you think the benefits of the 4-day week, given that there'll be just, everyone's taking part and everyone's benefiting? So I'm not even sure what question I'm asking.
No, but I
you see what I
do
mean?
understand. The answer is yes. So economists has been interested on the productivity puzzle, and there are different views. One is very unspecific. Productivity is productivity hasn't increased, so how firms are working is not. That's one. The other one that views it's more related to demand, to the fact that what's called a secular stagnation. This is a demand side argument, that just aggregate demand in the economy is low. And that's why output hasn't really restarted after the financial crisis. And this is the view that led to the US, to Biden's plan to stimulate the economy, to stimulate aggregate demand. So, and then some economists think it's too much or too little, but that's one view that's based with demand. And then there's the third one that's on innovation, that it's just the motor. And this is also applies to the US. That the motor of innovation, ideas are getting harder to find, and even if we have nanotechnology and the internet and the artificial intelligence is not really either working or being transmitted to the economy. And so I think the 4-day week would actually act on these three elements. So I don't really know which one, what's the culprit. Probably, usually in economics, it's a mix of many things. But what I do think the 4-day week would act on three. So first, it would almost, that's what firms have been showing, that it increases the productivity per hour. So that's an important distinction. When we talk about productivity, usually we talk about productivity per hour, and then cumulative with the number of hours worked. Then you get the total, GDP per capita. But essentially, the problem with productivity is productivity per hour. And the response to that is usually tending to working more hours, like the cab drivers that I told you. But what the firms that have been trying the 4-day week find that they can increase the productivity per hour, and usually so much that it would compensate the reduction in hours. And what we economists don't tend to think about is that the fact of this time off will itself create new things, either with more customers, demand side, or the innovation. That's the one that you're mentioning that happened to you. But it's for me, I think it's the most important, the strongest argument for the 4-day week is the fact that this leisure time, it means for a lot of people to create something new, to have an idea, to open a company, to invent something, to write a book, to to create, to play in your bands and launch a new album. And I think that again, the best of examples is Henry Ford, that was working for Thomas Edison in one of his factories for 6 days a week for 3 years. And while he was building the first car with an internal combustion engine in his garage. So he became Henry Ford because of what he did in his leisure time. And like him, there are so many that, and I think it's there where part of the gains of the 4-day working week, the fact that it will promote innovation through the leisure time, and this innovation will be transmitted to productivity, because you'll create new businesses that will either produce new things or produce the same things in a better way.
Thank you for that. I didn't know that about Ford, but I'm unsurprised to hear it. I used to work for NCR Corporation, if you know NCR Corporation.
No.
Long time ago. They're probably most famous for ATM machines.
Okay.
Cash registers, things like that. And Thomas Watson was one of their most senior engineers. And in his spare time, he started what became IBM.
Yeah. So when it's just we forget. So Apple was the same. So not Steve Jobs, but Steve Wozniak.
Wozniak.
And he was working for HP 1 year until 1 year after building the first Macintosh. And I think that's why now there are so many possibilities because of the internet apps. And so I think there are a lot of possibilities, and if people have more time, you have a lot of these people that they had to pay the bills, they just didn't, they got a job, they have a family, but they are really passionate about something else, and that's what the 4-day week will give possibilities for, not to explore that dimension.
And long may that continue. I'm just going to add in, well, I did some work for, not in an academic basis, but I did some work for Lancaster University Management School 4 or 5 years ago. And I was invited to, just as part of the audience, to be on to go to a manufacturing sort of conference, if you like.
Yeah.
And I put the question to them. There were half a dozen or so quite high profile manufacturers in the northwest of the country, and I asked the question around productivity and performance and all of those kind of things in my non-academic way, but equally they're non-academics as well. And do you know, one of them answered first, and I suspect part of this might have been the crowd, but one of them put their hands up and he said, well, one of the things that really holds us back is the lack of training programs that were around in the 1980s when British manufacturing was at an all-time high with automotive, with electronics, things like that. And he was sort of moaning that the government sponsored training programs that were around then aren't around now, and that's why we're not as productive, why the manufacturing sector has gone downhill. Now, I suspect the answer is one of 20 different things that are contributing to the productivity puzzle. But I'm genuinely interested in, so do we as a nation then, and perhaps this is unfair on you as well, but do we as a nation not invest as much in developing our people as perhaps other nations in the G7 do?
I don't know. So there's certainly a view, that the Germans do more practical. That they have some pathways that are more technical, not just higher education, and those are more directed for factories and businesses. But I have there is certainly a view that education solves everything. That's very, very important. But then it seems that it's always a very easy way to say, oh, we should promote education, convert workers if they are in some occupations to others. And it all sounds, and it's important, and it all sounds great. But then when we go to the statistics, both in the US and the UK, there is 1/3 of all college graduates are working in low-skilled occupations, meaning occupations that are majority performed by people without college. So driving a car, or waiters and waitresses. 25% of the American waiters and waitresses have a college degree.
Yeah.
So it's not purely about education. It probably also matters what you are teaching, but it's probably more than that, because what might happen is just you are educating people, but then if they are not the opportunities, then they'll end up do something where so it's also creating those opportunities that are not there. So this what's called underemployment, it's also a symptom of the things not working well. So it's not just the unemployment rate. We tend only to look at the unemployment rate as a symptom of things not working well. But then, if, for example, in the UK, for each unemployed, there is one that's called inactive that want a job. So these are people that want a job, but because they didn't actively search for one, they are not considered unemployed in the statistics, and they are inactive. They are not part of the labor force, but they just as big a pool as the unemployed. And on top of that, we have 1/3 of people with college that are working in unskilled occupations, or the ones in precarious jobs in the gig economy. So it's kind of a bigger symptom of the things not working, together with the fact that the wages haven't increased for 50 years, that the innovation is not working, the motor of innovation in the US, or the productivity has stagnated, the lack of competition. This is why the title is "How can the 4-day week save the economy?" All my colleagues, all my economist friends, they say, "Oh, this is an exaggerated subtitle. It's exaggerated. It's very presumptuous that it will save. What's there to be saved? It's not." But I do think there is something quite profoundly wrong, or the economies are sick, because you see it's the productivity stagnated, the innovation that's not working, competition is not, there's lack of competition, the firms have market power, unemployment and underemployment, and you have at the same time bubbles in the financial markets, bubbles in the housing market, bubbles in cryptocurrencies, bubbles in the non-tradable NFTs, and then you have the populist movements. I think this is a symptom that things are not, and we are not finding solutions for it. And that's where I think that the 4-day week it's eccentric, maybe, but I think we should think about it as a possible solution.
Was it? I think you're probably right there. A couple of things there. I think it was Robert Soloff that said something about productivity in computers, wasn't it? Productivity, I can see it everywhere apart from the numbers.
The statistics, exactly.
And I just want to talk to you about your strapline, because I think of your book. I was told, and I come from a sales sort of background, as you know, where my responsibility, if you like, is to influence or persuade, often without empirical sort of evidence, which is why sales doesn't have a very good perception here in the UK. It doesn't. People are always a little cynical, sometimes rightly so, because there have been some poor behaviours. My point being is that in your title, when I was told how to do presentations back in, and I still stick by this, I was told that when you make a presentation, you should either excite or disturb. Otherwise, So I think you've excited people with your title and strapline, and that's going to make them want to pick up the book. and I've actually done something quite unusual with your book, which is that I read it. I've got a big library behind me, half of which I've only read, and the rest of them. But I actually read yours.
But we are all like that. It's so much easier to buy a book than to actually than read it. No, it's so that's why some people ask me. The measure of success. It's hard. It's not just the books that you sell, but then how many people read it, and then how many people actually act on it or talk about it. So I do have to thank you for your review and for actually going the other. Actually reading it and then talking about it.
And here we are. And I'm really excited to do that. Okay, brilliant. So I'm just coming into the last couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be I feel like I've been selfish already, but I mentioned at the beginning, even before we sort of started recording, really, that I never got a chance to go to university. It just wasn't in my family some sort of gift, if you like. But I've said to my wife, I would really like to graduate in something before I die. And since I have an interest in economics, I would really like to do a master's in economics somewhere. So I'm putting you on the spot just now. Are you familiar with anything that might be relevant to me, given that I'm not at the beginning of my career, I'm sort of some way towards the end.
So I'm glad, well, that you asked. So as I explained in the book, mathematics took a big turn in the 30s of being very. We use a lot of mathematics, the models, the statistics. So it creates a huge barrier to entry for people who don't have the backgrounds with maths or with econ. It's very hard, especially to go to the MSc. So at Birkbeck, we do have one program that's a conversion course for undergraduates. So it's a 1-year graduate diploma. And usually people come and then they go to do their masters elsewhere. So at LSE or UCL, they usually have done other things, so history or physics or literature, and then they do the 1-year kind of intensive course. It has the four main, so mathematics, macroeconomics, and statistics and econometrics. But I still think this wouldn't be ideal for you. So then what we created 4 years ago, it's an MSc in politics, philosophy, and economics.
Oh, PPE. Okay.
PPE, which is very rare in terms of an MSc.
Yeah.
But then we created one module just purely in economics. So I teach there purely economics, but in a non-technical way.
Yeah.
And what we are planning to do, and this is still firsthand, it's not, it wouldn't be for next year, it would be for the following academic year, would be to start a non-technical MSc, a non-technical economics MSc, which doesn't really exist anywhere because of that. So it always requires this very technical, it's always a lot of maths, and then that brings a problem in itself, because when you teach something, you always start with a very basic model, and the very basic model, the conceptual view of the world, without what we call frictions, without any problems. Everything works perfectly. Everyone knows the information. There's perfect competition, and then it gives that students see it as very unrealistic. But what we do in practice, it's much more developed than that, and we study when the market fails, when you need the government. But that just doesn't come across to students because we are just interested in giving them the technical instruments. And this is a bit what we are trying to change with this MSCs. But it's not yet there. But you do have the MSc PPE. If you want, that's a mix. You'll have modules from philosophy, modules from politics. But Birkbeck is the best place for you because already when most of our students are, are working, they are what we call mature students. We have just, that's why it makes it so interesting to teach, because everyone comes with a different background, but they are there because they want to. And this is really rare when you are
as well.
What?
That's very powerful.
It is, and that's why it's after coming to Birkbeck, it's if I ever change, it's going to be such so different, and I'll lose something, because it's much better for someone teaching than teaching the 18 or 19 or 20-year-old that is there but not really sure, and suddenly you have very good students, and but it's really different. Here the students are there because they want to, and they are engaged, and even if they don't have the time to be the best at doing mathematics, the problem sets, but they are really interested in how the world works and learning. So that's and all the lectures are from 6 to 9 in the evening, so it makes life much easier.
So that works. Yeah, absolutely.
But let's keep if you want, keep in touch, check the PPE, and then if we do start, it's not sure yet, but if we do start the MSc, the non-technical, then it would really suit you, I think.
It sounds really interesting. I'll go on the website, and perhaps I'll put an alert in and see what kind of happens. Pedro, thank you so much for being really generous with your time. I'm really grateful. I've learned loads. I feel like I've put you under the spotlight a little bit. I hope me doing that, but it's been incredibly insightful. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for reading the book and for the review and the interest, because in the end that's the best, the pleasure of writing a book. I didn't know about it, I didn't anticipate it, but it's this, no, it's actually people reading and making people think or just see the world in a little different way. It's a great feeling. So thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Listen, have a fantastic rest of day. And in case we don't speak again, I really hope your daughter gets up to see the 4-day working week and loads of leisure time afterwards as well.
Very well.
Thank you ever so much, Pedro.
Bye.
Bye-bye.